Escape Pod. Episode 647. Flashback Friday. Imma Gonna Finish You Off, by Marina J. Lostetta.
Hello everyone, welcome to Escape Pod. This week we have a Flashback Friday for you, and the story comes to us from Marina J. Lostetta. Marina is the author of Numenon and Numenon Infinity, Lifeboats, 3 short stories of space travel and epic discovery, and countless short stories, including this one. This originally appeared on Escape Pod as episode 501 on July 28th, 2015, and was both hosted and read by, well, me. So it's a real pleasure to be back here. So, without further ado, I can hand you over to Marina's words and past me, because it's story time. Imma Gonna Finish You Off, by Marina J. Lostetta. On the examining table lounged a body. It was an unremarkable body, rather wrinkly, with an inordinate amount of hair in all the wrong places and too few clothes for most people's liking, but otherwise nothing to write your congressman about. The only thing special about the body was that it was dead, a problem that Detective Harry Sordido hoped would resolve itself quite soon. "Will he just get on with the coming back to life already?" Harry huffed, checking the glowing numbers embedded in his left wrist. With his right hand he patted his ample, middle-aged girth. "He's not the only victim I've got to question today." "I'm not sure what's the matter with him," said the medical examiner, lifting the dead man's wrist between 2 thin fingers. "He should have let out a nice scream of life by now." He let the limb flop back to the sanitary paper. "Well, what do you think it was?" asked the detective. "Accidental? Experimental? Purposeful? What do you think he died of?" "You'll have to ask him to be sure. He was found out on the sidewalk. No indications of violence or a struggle, but he does look a tad flaccid." Disgruntled Glover then. No, I mean on the whole. Like he's been wrung out." They both stared at the body for a long time. "You don't think he's really—" began Detective Sordido. "It is starting to seem a bit permanent." "That's impossible! No one's really died for damn near a millennium." The examiner shrugged. "There's a first time for every eventuality." "What was his name again?" "Well, Mr. X is what it says in his biotat. Look, I'll show you." The 2 men moved to the once ambulatory end of the body, and the examiner held a black light over the pad of X's right foot. The tat read, "Name: Xanthax Aurelian X. Current occupation: government-mandated homelessness. Next occupation: Governor of Greater California, provided the line for Burger Flipper still hasn't moved. Current address: cardboard box, corner of Rock Street and Hard Plaza. Age." Next to the age label was a biocounter, much like the implanted watch in Harry's wrist. It ticked off the seconds, minutes, hours, years, etc. Funny thing about Mr. X is, it had switched from ticking to sticking. Harry tapped it with his index finger. "Is this broken? How come it's not counting?" "I'm telling you, I think this one took 62 more years, and he would have seen the big thou. And he bit the dust while performing his civic duty." He shook his head sadly. "I wonder why people do everything they can to avoid obligatory homelessness. You know what they say. Only 2 things are certain: taxes and the government taking away all your stuff. Your stuff, your job, your passion. The government acted like people were dolls, ever ready to have their identities stripped on and off. More than 900 years ago, the United States had decided that when you invent immortality, even if it's by accident, you've hit the apex of your existence as a nation and you should just tap the pause button before some blockhead uninvents it. How the nation functioned and existed at that very time was very carefully tabulated, preserved, and perpetuated. But people got bored. People got bored living forever with no change, and when people are bored, they start having thoughts like, why do I pay for federal life insurance if I'm never going to actually die? And, we haven't given anarchy a shot in a good long time. So, The career swap was instituted. When the government compiled enough data to indicate that you'd gotten whatever you could out of your current lot in life, it was time to re-allot. You've been a movie star for 4 decades? Maybe assembly line work is next in your queue. You've been an oil tycoon for 60 years. Might be nice to try tree hugging for a while. Harry's jobs had ranged from robotics program engineer to boxing instructor to black-eyed PDI-er, but he'd never been forced to hold another career for as long as he'd been forced to be a detective. He missed program engineering. Unfortunately, inventing new things tended to get in the way of cultural stagnation, so that career path had fallen out of style. You know, considering the non-transient nature of Mr. X's condition, I'd say this man was murdered, said the ME. Well, how exactly do you suggest I go about finding the killer without interviewing the victim, huh? Demanded Harry. I think you should start with something called a clue. What the hell is that? Those 2 puncture wounds surrounded by this large bruise on the inside of his right elbow? And that's a clue. Could be. You said he seems wrung out. Drained? They looked at each other and intoned together. Exsanguinated? Could be, said the ME. I'd have to, perform an autopsy? Cut him open? Without his permission? I don't really see another option. Detective Sordido sighed. Okay, as long as I don't have to watch, I'll go investigate his belongings. The ME stopped him before he opened the door. Harry? Yeah. How's Helen? Cold, last I heard. He hadn't seen his wife in 6 months. She'd been reallotted to a fishing trawler in Alaska, while he'd been directed to stay put and detect, by damn it. Give her my love the next time you talk. She won't be getting anyone's love but mine, Bob. Harry was paranoid enough as it was. He was worried she'd already found herself a salty Alaskan sea dog. A sea dog with a large pile of bones. Or maybe just the one. He made his way down the hall, taking a right at the sign that said, Dead this way, living this way. The third door he encountered was the changing room, in which the temporary cadaver's personal effects were kept until they could be reclaimed. Why do I get all the wonky cases? He groused silently. Last week there was the skydiver who'd insisted on jumping out of an airplane's sun's chute because, well, if he got the biggest rush of his life, falling to 200 feet, wouldn't he get an even bigger rush if he just went all the way? Then there'd been the suicide a few months ago, crazy scientist thinking he'd found a cure for the Imma virus. Now, who, in his right mind, would want to cure immortality? Hopefully this Mr. X case didn't have anything to do with those crackpots. Harry doubted it, since the scientist was now serving 120,138,007,001 years in the pen for the attempted murder of, well, everyone. But why would someone take out a vagrant? There was no sense serial killing these days, what with one victim shouting your guilt before you could get to the next. And if it had been a violent crime of passion, Mr. X probably wouldn't look so indifferent. The waiting room was cold and smelled of formaldehyde, clearly the first thing born-again olfactory glands were likely to encounter. Mr. X's things, a heavy coat, a pair of kneeless trousers, brown sandals, and a pair of patterned socks. No skivvies, Harry noted with distaste, had been shrink-wrapped and laid out over a plastic chair, wrapped but not cleaned. Upon closer inspection, Harry noticed that not only were the clothes grimy, they'd come that way. Fake dirt, fake sweat stains, definitely government issue. The only things that stood out were the socks. Clean, white, covered with illos of little grapes and green bottles with exclamations of, "Ah!" Nothing like unwinding scattered here and there. Even the soles were pristine. They were brand new. He needed to figure out who'd been given a license to hand out socks to the homeless. "Welcome to the Wine Socks Family Vineyard," said the receptionist with a plastic smile. More and more people were replacing their enamel with polyethylene these days. Home of It's Wine in a Can. The grounds are open 5 days a week for tours from 1:30 until... I'm here to see the proprietor, the widow Wine Socks, interrupted Harry. The receptionist held up a manicured finger without missing a beat. 6:17. Our offices take reservations for weekend parties and private events. We hope you enjoy your stay. Weinstock's money wasn't old. It was geriatric. As the government saw it, if there was one thing no one got tired of, it was being a wine baron. So the Weinstocks had been in the same profession since before the onset of immortality. Harry tried again. I'm here to see... The receptionist splayed his hands palm down before him. Each of his painted nails had been labelled with a number. Presione numero uno para habla en español. Press 2 for distribution and bulk purchases. Press 3 for vendor locations. Harry held up his right palm, mentally calling up the biotat of his badge. I am here to see... Press 4 for parties and events. Press 5 for... He slammed his hands down on top of the receptionist's. What do I press to get me through to your boss? He grumbled. The receptionist took a deep breath, ready to continue with the list, but then caught sight of the twitch in Harry's upper lip, and his cheeks quickly deflated. Extracting one hand, he pushed something under the desk, and a door to the right swung ajar. Thank you. Have a nice century, the receptionist called after him, his voice stripped of its varnish. Badilla Weinstock's office was relatively easy to locate, what with the cherry wood twin doors guarding it, and a humongous flashing sign above them that said, The decider of corporate fates is in. Outside the doors was a cramped nook occupied by a desk, a chair, 3 potted ferns, and 1 fern pot. Miss Potts tried desperately to flag Harry down. Not looking forward to a rehash, fry, or indeed bake of his previous reception, he barreled on through the doors past the assistant. Madam Weinstocks, he declared, I am a detective from the CA Offices of Detection, and... he stammered as he noted that Madame was missing from the room. In fact, half the room was missing from the room. Near the doors, everything was as one would expect. Wood and leather, bit of glass, all arranged to fool the observer into believing the items hadn't come from such pastoral things as trees, cows and sand. But halfway across the marble floor, the room ended at an expanse of vines and trellises. It looked like someone had accidentally dropped live nature on top of all the processed nature. Harry just hoped they hadn't dropped it on his key lead. Is anyone at home? He said, approaching the greenery. Why don't you come in? Called a willowy voice from the leaves. And what all happened to me in there, he thought. Perhaps that was where Mr. X had met his eventuality. I'd rather not, seeing as I'm here about a possible murder. A what? Asked Widow Weinstocks, emerging. Her wrinkled skin looked leathery, or papery, with what could be called a light greenish hue, the colour of money. She was so rich, she was practically made of the stuff. And it showed. I'm here about a dead man. That's right, my husband's passed. Poor dear, missed being immortal by 2 days. That's not who... I mean a recent permanent... Never mind. Perhaps he shouldn't go throwing words like permanent around. If anyone caught on to the true gravity of this investigation, there would be panic. The records office said you obtained a license to hand out socks and wellness checks to the destitute a few days ago. Yes, I did. I also asked to hand out work permits, but they said most of the homeless had been that way for less than a decade. I shouldn't go robbing them of the complete experience, they said. Harry asked Mrs. Weinstocks all of the requisite questions, trying to gauge if she might have had anything to do with Mr. X's drainage problem. She seemed on the verge of drying up herself. For the wellness checkup, you had a few doctors come out, I presume. Just the one. He was very good. Wonderful. Her watery eyes went a little dreamy for a minute. Bedside manner, he offered. It was in the bed, mostly, she said happily. Harry squashed that mental picture like a 10 weeks at the bottom of the bin tomato. How do you get through all the patients? Medical bots. Robots. Really? Interesting ones, too. Very personable. I've never seen personableness in a bot. Harry made a note. Mr. X was quite chatty, you said. Yes, spoke at length with almost everyone. Quite eloquently, too, and not as shriveled as in that picture you've got there. Could you get me a list of everyone in attendance, please? As she left to get the records from Miss Potts, Harry's biophone rang. He plugged his nose and popped his ears. Yes, he answered in a nasal squeak. It was the ME. I've got another one. Dead body that won't stop it. I mean, seems to be in the same condition as Mr. X. And she is also obligatorily without roof. A Miss Gondand, She had the twin punctures and bruising, too. And their bodies were indeed drained of blood, to the point where the Imma virus couldn't regenerate itself, let alone their cells. I mean, we're talking dry here, Harry. Dry. Dry as the eczema on my hoo-ha. Do you know how fast someone would have to bleed out for that? And there's definitely no arterial separage. Mrs. Winesauks returned with the list. Miss Gondand was on it. Looks like it's time to pay doctor. He scanned the paper. Agony. Really? Pay Dr. Agony a visit, said Harry. Do you think it's easy being a doctor this epoch? Said Dr. Agony. All people were worried about before immortality came along was just dying. As long as they couldn't feel themselves dying, they didn't care what they did to their bodies. Now they're actually afraid of having to live with the ugly skin blotches, or losing their memory to too much drink, or forgetting where they left the severed hand now that a new one has grown back. Easy, please. The doctor was a young man who looked barely of age. When immortality struck, it stuck, no matter where you were on life's bell curve. There were quite a lot of parents ticked off about having to change diapers for all eternity, but their age was nothing compared to that of the gawky 15-year-olds who had been looking forward to waving at adolescence in the rearview mirror. Most criminals Harry had encountered were people who'd never come to terms with having pimples, from now until the apocalypse. You examined the individual's reflexes? Asked Harry. My reflex robot did. So you examined their respiratory systems then? My breath bot did. Their circulatory systems? My heart bot. Harry scratched his chin. What exactly did you do at the vineyard? Wait, never mind. I know the answer. Mrs. Winesauks. Maybe the good doctor had a mind-scrubbing bot. There was a knock at the doctor's door. Much to Harry's surprise, in flapped an orange and purple sea turtle thing, about the size of a cat. What the hell is that? Hello, I am a cardiovascular monitoring unit, it said. May I give you a hug? My heart bot, the doctor clarified. It talks. May I give you a hug? Yes, and it has a personality and everything. Sentient. That's illegal. AI was invented post-Imma virus and was banned in the US. Harry knew. He'd worked on some of the first prototypes back in his programming days. He'd even based some of the test personalities on his friends and family members. Hug me! Oh, come now, detective. Most people know the old stop was ridiculous. We're not allowed to pass any new laws. That's the only reason it doesn't change. My bots improve lives. Your own, you mean? They go do your job while you scamper off with the widow of the week. They're not always widows. Don't look at me like that. It's murder having an 18-year-old's libido for 900 years. You know what else is murder? Murder. What? Hug me! Harry was about to give Agony the whole spiel, but the heartbot had flopped over to his feet and was flailing around like an excited puppy. Why does it keep saying that? That's how it examines your system. Hug me! If I do, will it go away? Yes. Reluctantly, Harry scooped the bot into his arms. It was squishy, like a stuffed toy. It wrapped its flippers around his chest and squeezed. Ah! It sighed happily. Then after a minute, beats per minute 72. Blood pressure 147/93. I have stage 1 hypertension, Harry explained defensively. Helen usually helped him with his de-stressing exercises. He hadn't remembered to do them once since she'd left. At least your heart is full of love and sprinkles, it said soothingly. Actually, sprinkles are bad for you. Helen helped him eat right, too. Thank you, I'll keep that in mind. He unceremoniously dropped the bot on the floor and it waddled out of the room. Where was I? Oh yeah, murder! When you were at the Winesauks estate, did any of the homeless threaten to expose your AIs? A few individuals did make comments about them, yes. Several people had been politicians before getting the homeless calls. How'd you feel about that? The doctor locked his fingers behind his head and leaned back in his swivel chair. Look, if I was worried about getting arrested for the AIs, do you think I'd let one be in here with you? And why are you asking me things? If someone was murdered, you should ask him about it. Aha! So you know the victim was a man. I could just as easily have said her. So you know the second victim was a woman. You never said there were 2 murders, protested Dr. Agony, but that doesn't answer my question. I ask the questions and you give me a close amalgamation of the truth. That's how this works. He'd watched some old detective movies just to be sure. After all, he'd never had to question people without the benefit of an eyewitness before. Did you take any blood samples while at the vineyard? My blood bot did. Harry finished. How much did it take? Teaspoons and teaspoons. Oh, the horror, came the answer. Don't you give me any lip. What did it do with the blood? Processed it. Ran tests. Assessed health. Everyone there was mostly fine. Bit malnourished, but Mrs. Winesauks didn't have permission to give him food. No one had any bleeding problems. No one leaked. Incontinence typically does not apply to veins. Samples were taken from the inner elbow, I presume. The doctor huffed. Yes. Really, detective, we're inching along here. How exactly did these people die? They bled out? It's an easy fix. Not like regrowing a head or anything. They should be revived by now. Stop bugging me and my bots and go get your answers. Just show me the damn blood bot. With an air of superiority that only teenagers can display without endless practice, the doctor led the detective out of the office, through the hospital's glaring white halls, and into a rather large supply closet. One shelf looked like it had been teleported from a toy store. Animal-reminiscent bots sat in a row, perfectly still until the two men approached. Then their heads all swiveled in one direction. The heart bot was there, curled up against a bot that looked like a stack of tin cans. It was definitely more robotic in appearance than the rest. Heart bot and blood bot like to stay close, said Dr. Agony. Hemoglobin stick together, said Heart bot. Just a bite, said blood bot, opening its wide mouth to reveal one long needle tooth. Oh, that's comforting, said Harry sardonically. I'm sure this one's great with the kiddies. He reminds them of the Wizard of Oz, thank you, said the doc. Yeah, well, so would Munchkins and Glenda the Good Witch, but I still wouldn't like them coming at me with a giant needle. He takes minimal samples. The vials are only so big, you know. If you don't believe me, let him test you. Just a bite, said the bot with a wide grin. Harry stilled himself. This was what old-time detectives did to solve a case. They went with the nitty-gritty. They got down and dirty. They put out or got shut out, or was that some other profession? He rolled up his sleeve and approached the needle. Oh, goody, said the bot. Then Harry remembered the movies and hesitated. If you want this thing to chomp down on me, you go first. You can't tell me what to do, whined the doctor. You're not my dad. Just do it, or so help me I will take your AIs away. The doctor seemed on the verge of tears. How come the law never lets me do what I want? He stuck out his arm and the blood bot bit down. A split second and it was over. The bot said, yum. A drawer in its chest opened and the spent needle dropped out as another slid into place. That was quick, Harry noted. Super suction, don't have to wait for the heart to pump it through. Satisfied that Agony wasn't trying to pull the well-processed sheep's hair over his eyes, Harry offered up his veins. Yum, said the bot. Harry noted the bot had a slight accent. Something East European. Couldn't quite place it, though. After several minutes, a bruise developed around the single pinprick on Harry's arm. One needle, one wound. Not the double puncture the ME had pointed out. When neither he nor the doctor showed any signs of spontaneous exsanguination, Harry decided the lead was a bust. Better to pick up tomorrow with other recipients of the widow's government-regulated charity. Going home was painful, not just because his gumshoes stuck to the sidewalk and he had to jerk them free, but because every corner of the house reminded him of Helen. It was the front door where he'd banged her head into the jam, carrying her over the threshold after their 10th wedding. Since death do us part no longer applied, the government had stipulated that the legal length of a marriage was now 75 years. There was the kitchen table where he used to pretend to eat her cooking every night. Back there was the dryer where she had shrunk every shirt he'd ever bought. And here on the couch was where she'd pretend to fall asleep at night to avoid his clumsy attempts at love-making. 780 years of marriage and you still don't know how the parts go together, Harold. She was something else, all right. But she'd been his something else. And their marriage would legally end in a year. If they weren't together to renew, would she look for someone else? Maybe that was why the government had assigned her to Alaska. Surely if people got tired of their careers, people got tired of their spouses. Best to alleviate their boredom, whether they asked for it or not. Harry had just settled in for his nightly date with a bag of cheese puffs and a 6-pack of wine coolers. Irritated, fussy, just suck on wine coolers, the best adult pacifiers since 2316, when he heard a bump at the front door. Damn kids pitching baseballs at my house again. He stomped over to the door and yanked it open, ready to give the neighbour boy a piece of whatever internal organ he hadn't tried yet, mind, liver, and spleen having all failed. Instead of a ball, an armful of tin came flying at him, shrieking, "Blah, blah, blah!" Acting on impulse, Harry threw the blood bot over his head. The thing landed on the couch. "Blah, blah, I want to suck your blood," it called, righting itself. "Mission accomplished, you did that this afternoon, but I want all of your blood." "How? Your vials can't hold it." "No vials installed, I can suck all I want. It does, unfortunately, fall out. I must get that fixed." Harry took up a fighting stance, ready for the bot to pounce again. The robot's accent tickled his memory. "Where were you manufactured?" The bot opened a panel on its belly and pointed to a raised stamp. "Made in Transylvania," Harry read. "Property of the government of Romania. If found, please call 40... "Wait! Your government property!" "Experimental medical equipment," it said proudly. "You're stolen, then?" "I beg your pardon. No one steals the Prince of Darkness, Master of the Night, Ruler of the Undead. I escaped." "Excuse me, you're who?" The bot stood, all 1.5 feet of him, tall and proud. It moved an arm in front of its face, then swept it aside dramatically, which was when Harry noticed it was wearing a cape. "I am Dracula." "I don't think so." "Sure, I am," it said imploringly, shaking a corner of the cape. "I come from Transylvania. I drink blood. I roam at night. I wear a dark cloak. All my friends look like animals, so I will probably turn into a bat one of these days. See? Dracula." "You conclude you're Dracula. You don't know it." "I had no idea whom I was until I saw an old movie a few weeks ago. I had not been installed with a personality. I was blank. But then I saw this master of the Underverse sucking blood, and it all fit. Found myself a dealer on the... what is the term? Down low? And he gave me a real nice personality to go with my new understanding." "Did he now?" "Yes. Makes me all jumpy if I don't get a blood fix." "You downloaded an addict's personality." The bot vibrated eagerly. "Of course! That's when I realized my true purpose." "Oh?" "I'm supposed to be a vampire maker, not a medical sampler. Undead is my business." I hate to tell you then, but you're not making anybody undead. Just dead. People already come back to life just fine on their own." The bot considered this for a moment, fist under chin. "That is a shame. Oh well, must keep on though. Digital imperative and all, you know how it is." It lunged at him. "God damn imported crap! Just another reason to buy domestic." Harry didn't have a gun. He never carried one. What was the use of shooting a perp if he just kept going? Wouldn't have worked on the bot anyway, but if the thing thought it was a vampire, would it respond to classic vampire remedies? When the robot jumped, Harry bent backwards like he was dodging a bullet in slow-mo. Gravity didn't agree with the tactic and dropped him on his ass. No surprise, he and Gravity hadn't gotten along for years. The evasive maneuver, though it did lack finesse, was successful. The bot went barreling into a curio cabinet and Harry scrambled towards the kitchen. Harry lunged at the spice rack on the counter. His fingers found a shaker and spun the lid off. In one swift pirouette, he turned and tossed the bottle's contents at the robot. A flurry of pale yellow powder rained down on his little tin body. The bloodbot stopped, its hands raised above its head in a menacing fashion, and briefly inspected its dusted exterior. "What in hell was that?" "Garlic powder." It dusted itself off. Look, I know it's easy to miss, but I am a vampire robot. Quite the upgrade from the flashy model, wouldn't you say?" "So one of my vegetable skewers through the hard drive won't help." "Oh, it would help immensely. Anything to inch your arms that much closer." "Great." Now the bloodsucker was between him and the front door, and Harry had his back against the countertop. The bot crept forward, its mouth splayed wide. He knew there was only one skill set that would help him here. He had to get to his stash of prototype personalities, souvenirs from the good old days. But how could he get close enough to input new functions into the bot's programming pad without receiving that fatal second puncture? Harry faked left, raced down the hallway and into the rear of the house. He'd make his last stand in his home office. Vaulting over his oak desk, he yanked open the bottom right drawer. There he kept a shoebox labelled boring, non-illegal stuff, containing all of his fascinating and banned paraphernalia. A small plastic case held the personality chips. As a series of clangs approached, he palmed one from the container, then stood erect. "Okay, baby Dracula," he said, "you want a piece of this? Come get me!" The robot took a flying leap towards him, and with precision that can only be accomplished by an overworked, middle-aged, has-been programmer, Harry twisted to one side, just escaping the bot's needle. In the same movement, he swiped open the programming port, shoved in the chip, and hit the download button. "Ha ha! Stake that!" he yelled. The bot tumbled end over end into the wall, then lay still. Hey, bloodsucker. You alive? I mean, functional?" Glancing at its wrists, he knew he didn't have a pair of handcuffs small enough. Maybe a rubber band would do. After a minute, the bot lifted its head. "Where am I?" it said in the same accent, but with a slightly different, more feminine intonation. "Not Kansas or Oz or anywhere that doctor would have you believe," Harry said. "We've got to get you back to Romania where you belong." "Harold Sordido, don't you dare send me to Romania." Harry stood up straight. That scolding tone was familiar. Which prototype had he? Helen? "Of course," said the bot, sitting upright. "You take these rubber bands off at once. After nearly 100 years of marriage, you would think a woman had earned some respect." The personality still thought it was in pre-band days. His heart fluttered. No one could tell him off like Helen could. He missed her terribly. "I have to get you to the post office," he told the bot. After all, he couldn't book medical equipment for murder. "Ship you back home where they'll sort you out and get you a proper personality. They should have known better. Forget to give a sentience and identity and they'll develop one of their own." The bot twisted its head this way and that. Its memory was coming back. The full system was attempting to integrate Helen's personality. "If those scientists in Transylvania think they can flip a switch and I will stop yapping, well, they've got another thing coming. They will never hear the end of this. Forgetting the personality download, letting me escape, letting me turn into a vampire? How's that for responsibility?" "I know, little bot," Harry said, tucking it under his arm. "I know." What he didn't say was that he thought the bot had had the right idea. Why should you be what someone else tells you to be? Why not escape? "But what about my friends?" it asked as they reached the front door. "What about Hotbot?" Harry stopped. "You don't want to leave it?" And it twisted its head side to side. "Your government's probably looking for you. It might get mad if I don't send you back." "I don't want to go. Hotbot would break." Harry let out a heavy sigh. That was Helen's loyalty. He shouldn't have ever doubted it. "All right, but I'm not letting you out of my sight until we can make sure this blood loss issue is taken care of, capiche?" He sat the robot on the couch and it smiled at him. A big, scary, automated smile that looked nothing like Helen's. Still, he found it endearing. What a case, he thought. My last. After he reunited the Bloodbot with its friends, Harry planned on changing careers, whether the government liked it or not. He was done being a detective. He was done with California. Maybe he'd pursue a vocation as a federal fugitive. Perhaps he'd even invite the illegal bots to come on the run with him. Sentient beings didn't deserve to be locked up in medical closets. But no matter what, he'd find Helen. It wouldn't make a difference to Harry if the Imma virus gave up and vacated humanity tomorrow. After all, surely there were better systems to reproduce in, greener pasteurizers. But if he had 2 more days or 20,000 more years, he would still want to spend them with her. Hell, what was the fun of being a fugitive if you couldn't flee for your life with the one you love? learned something really interesting when I was researching this story. You see, I had this whole idea for an end cap planned out about how this story is thematically very similar to Blade Runner, especially in the amount of ethical lines, or blades, it runs along. It just takes a much lighter tone to it. And I found something out really interesting about Blade Runner, specifically that term. Blade Runner wasn't called Blade Runner because it's a Joseph Wambaugh-esque term for police officers in perpetual ethical no man's land. It was called that because Ridley Scott had the title mentioned to him, liked it, and bought it, just not the book that was under the title. You see, the term Blade Runner originally belonged as a title to a novella by Alan E. Nourse. Nourse was a science fiction writer and doctor, and in 1974 he combined the two in a novel called The Blade Runner. Brilliantly, it's a proto-cyberpunk text about a doctor smuggling medical supplies in a eugenics-ruled dystopia. Those supplies included, you guessed it, scalpels. Blade Runner. William S. Burroughs read it, loved it, and began writing a screenplay. This screenplay and title percolated up to the nascent Blade Runner production that was, at the time, on its 4th or 5th draft of script, and really quite motivated to find a title that didn't involve the words electric and sheep in any way. The rest is movie history, and all movie history that is still, even after this slightly unusual detour, pleasingly in line with this story. Because what a story this is. I loved it the first time round for the excellent world building and humour, and the interesting perspective on immortality and what that would do to society. I of course also love Dracula Bot. Who doesn't love Dracula Bot? I love it for those reasons still, but with 3 years distance and experience, I can appreciate the artfulness of what Marina does here so much more. Looked at one way, this is comedy, the vampire bot, the gentle subversion of male responsibility, the sense of one last crumpled, endearingly irresponsible, romantic last hurrah. Looked at a different way, this is horror. Who Wants to Live Forever works as a song because it's a question we need to be asked and can never answer definitively. The musical chairs society depicted here is a classic and very plausible piece of human bodge job. Everyone is unhappy for the same amount of time, all the time. Work. We do what we must, not because we can, but because we must. And looked at a third way, this is a classic male entitlement fantasy. One last hurrah with a conveniently ethically carbon-neutral and newly blood-sucking download of your other half. A license to misbehave that literally no one else on Earth has. And still a fourth, this is a love story. A touching and genuine one, and a fifth, it's a horror story, except this time, about what it's like being trapped in a calcified world when you've been conditioned to accept change, to expect entropy, when every job, if not every life, has an incept date. What happens when you push against that? And only you push against that. Are you a hero? A villain? An idiot? A leader? The answer, I suspect, is always yes. And that brings me back to Blade Runner and the original definition I assumed. A detective who runs the lines, someone who goes to the dark places no one else can, or perhaps here, someone who sees the light places and dares to head towards them when no one else remembers how. Run fast, run well, and feed the vampire bot. We rely on you to pay our authors and cover our server costs, and there are 3 ways you can do that. The one which involves no financial outlay, I'm guessing a lot of people might want to hear first. I can almost hear the platonic conversation now. We can help out, but we don't have to pay. Why, yes, that is entirely correct. You see, here's the thing. A company like this, podcasts like these, live and die based on exposure and reputation. And that means we need people to be talking about us. We need people to mention us when, as always happens once a financial quarter, someone, it's usually the New York Times, goes, "So, genre fiction podcasts are a thing and have just been invented." They haven't just been invented. We didn't invent them, but they haven't just been invented. So here's what you can do in relation to that. You can, if you hear a story that you like, tweet a link to it, or write a blog post about it. I'm actually starting to do this with other shows at the moment on my own blog. Or if you have a podcast yourself and you want one of us to come on as a guest, get in touch. We love that stuff. We really do. Or if you are a Spotify user and you really want to hear us on the service and we're not quite there yet, because we're not, Escape Pod is there, the other shows aren't, then request us. Or leave a review on Google or iTunes. All it will cost you, I promise, is time, and it will help more than you can possibly know. And I can actually give you, today in particular, a really concrete example of that. Those top 10 genre fiction podcast articles, the ones which are actually always really useful, we don't normally register on those because we've been around so long and they inevitably tend to focus on newer shows. Pseudopod was referenced in one of those this week because people have been talking about us, because people have been discussing the show as it unfolds. It works, it helps, and if you can, please do it. Of course, it also helps if you have money, because we love money. Money helps us pay authors and staff and stops hosting companies yelling at us. There are two ways that you can support us that way too. The first is by clicking on escapepod.org and just hitting either donate or subscribe. Donations can be as much or as little as you want. Subscriptions start at $5. Hold that thought, because you get stuff at $5. And you also get stuff at $5 over at Patreon, where we have a constantly updating activity feed that includes everything which we do. There's a bunch of Worldcon stuff. There's a 9 Worlds piece going up there. There's an interview that was carried out with Mary Robinette Kowal at Left Bank Books, discussing the fantastic Calculating Stars and Fated Sky duology. It's all kinds of good stuff, and about once every 4 or 5 weeks, Karen Bovenmeyer and I will do a 2-header half-hour genre discussion show over there, which is exclusive to Patreon backers. And again, at $5, you gain access to the same thing you gain access to through PayPal subscriptions, which is the premium content bucket. You really should get around to calling it the premium content tank, possibly vault. There is a ridiculous amount of stuff in there. We, as a company, have been around getting on for 15 years at this point, and we've put out a lot of premium content in that time. And pretty much all of it's in there. And new stuff is added regularly, and for $5 a month, you gain access to them. Over on Patreon, for $10 a month or higher, you gain access to lots of other stuff too. I'm recording this on Friday, and one of the things I'll be doing over the weekend is writing up the 3,000 to 4,000 word reading recommendation for one of our Patreon backers. This happens at the $10 level, and basically once a month we will use a random number generator and assign a list of numbers to all the backers. And whoever's number comes up, we'll get in contact with and give them a list of 4 or 5 questions about their reading habits. And then based on their answers, we will recommend books to them and provide links to authors' social medias and free stories which authors have put up that they can sample and all this kind of stuff. It's like a roadmap for your fall reading, and it's really, really good fun. We've done 2 or 3 of these now. We've got really good feedback on it. I love doing them because, I mean, that's one of the best parts of my job. You know, I'm professionally enthusiastic, and this gives me an excuse to be professionally enthusiastic. So, if you would like me to be professionally enthusiastic at you, then that's a really good level. So there you go. You can help by boosting our signal, you can help by donating, and you can help by doing all of that if you want to. But regardless, thank you for listening, and thank you for helping out. We'll be back next week. Normal service will be resumed, and then, as ever, we will be a production of Escape Artists Incorporated and released under a Creative Commons Attribution, Non-Commercial, No Derivatives license. And we leave you, somewhat appropriately, with this line from Philip K. Dick's Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep? It's the basic condition of life to be required to violate our own identity. We'll see you next week, folks. Until then, have fun.